The next bill on the calendar for the day is House File 1141. The Chief Clerk will report the bill.
House File number 1141, an act relating to housing, establishing a supplemental budget for the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency.
I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is our housing bill this year. This is a good bipartisan bill that's going to do a lot of good for Minnesotans. And the first thank you I want to make is really for every member on our housing committee, from Co-Chair Igo to Vice Chair Kozlowski, Vice Chair Dotseth, but all of our committee members. I think what allowed us to come together on this bill is that we were able to maybe not agree on the solutions, but agree on the problem, which is that we have a housing shortage in Minnesota, and to agree on the virtue that Minnesota is a better place when people have safe, accessible, affordable housing. The broad highlights of this bill: we're making meaningful investments that will build more homes, both affordable homes to rent and to own, from border to border in all 87 counties. We're judicious in our budgeting, making these investments in a manner that are cost neutral. And we include a set of fiscal reforms that add transparency and accountability to how public dollars are being spent. Specifically, we're making investments through housing infrastructure bonds, our state's bread and butter tool to build more homes. At the level of this investment, we're going to see more than 1,000 homes built all across the state. In addition, we're investing $20 million in the Greater Minnesota Workforce Program. This is going to build workforce housing specifically outside of the 7-county metro area and specifically in smaller towns. We're also investing $150,000 in homeowner education and $150,000 in a senior housing pilot project brought to us by Representative Zalesnikar. These investments are cost neutral and come at a price tag of $22.3 million, and we're using unspent interest earnings within MHFA to make these investments. In addition, we're working to ensure housing stability for families across the state by directing unspent dollars from the Tyler Housing Settlement to family homelessness assistance and prevention. We're using our state's primary tool here that delivers relief in all 87 counties with trusted providers. Along with these funding provisions, we include reform on policy provisions that aim to create more transparency, increase oversight, and ensuring the best use of public dollars. And we're doing this with an eye towards making sure that the Minnesota Housing Finance Agency does have the resources they need to adequately staff and ensure that we have high program integrity. And I'll note that that's something that MHFA has done incredibly well. We want that to continue. But with the set of reforms and transparency we include in this bill, we're giving the legislature a little bit of line of sight in the future budgeting practices at MHFA and better ensure that dollars are going where the legislature intends, into programs that will make a difference for Minnesotans. Look forward to a debate on the bill. I want to end with some thank yous. One, to our Housing Dream Team, our committee administrator, Benji Brinks, and partisan DFL researcher, Molly Peterson, our committee legislative assistant, Jonathan Smith, our incredible nonpartisan staff, Justin Cope and Katrina Highmark. I want to thank, I'm sure my co-chair will mention partisan GOP staff, but we had a great working relationship with our partisan staff as well. We had a good committee, and this is a good bipartisan bill, and I encourage a lot of green votes on the board.
There are amendments at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment.
Nornis moves to amend House File number 1141, the second engrossment. The amendment is coded A6.
I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is my amendment. Members, this amendment deals with the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit Program, also known as LIHTC. It's a federal program meant to incentivize the construction of affordable housing. Typically, investors get about 1/3 of the money needed for a LIHTC project from the federal government, and then private funds are responsible for the rest. In exchange for getting these federal funds, they agree to limit the rent increases on these projects so that these apartments can remain affordable for the residents. The problem is that what we're seeing is that for most of the projects, in a lot of cases, the increases in the rent are exceeding what these senior residents are getting in their Social Security cost of living adjustments. We see this in communities across the state, including mine. I've got a community, the Legends of Blaine, which is one of these LIHTC properties, and they have seen their increases in their rent significantly above what they get in their Social Security increases. These are folks who are on fixed incomes. They are living off of Social Security. One of the residents from a neighboring community, Coon Rapids, testified in a 2025 hearing and put some specific numbers to this issue. She shared that in 2022, the Social Security COLA, or cost of living adjustment, was 8.7%, which was fairly healthy that year. And yet the rent increase in her building, again, this is a LIHTC building, was 12.5%. Then the next year, the Social Security COLA was 3.2%. They were able to secure, by some advocacy of the residents, holding their rent increase in their building at 3%. But a lot of the other properties from the same developer in our state went up 5%. Again, in 2024, Social Security COLA was 2.5%, but the rent in these buildings increased 3.5% to 5%. This particular person who testified in this hearing said that 73% of her income goes to rent while living in what is supposed to be a low-income rental facility for seniors. These senior citizens sell their homes to move into facilities like this, thinking that these facilities are where they're going to live for the rest of their lives. These are their homes. And yet now they're scared that with these rent increases far exceeding the cost of living adjustment they get from their Social Security, that they are going to be priced out of their homes. Seniors are skipping out on medication, on groceries, balanced diets to simply afford what it takes to live in a low-income property. These properties are already subject to rent control. I think this is an important piece for people to understand. The developer has already made the agreement that they're going to get public funds in order to, in exchange, they agree to limit the rent increases. The problem is what that limit is based on. Under current statute, it's based on area median income, which in a lot of cases is a reasonable metric to use. But when you think about who's actually living in these properties, senior citizens, most of them are not working. So while it would be great if the area and median income, the wages of the people living around these buildings increases substantially, if the Social Security COLA, if general inflation is not adjusting at the same rate, well, then these seniors don't have it in their budget to account for higher rent increases. So what this amendment does is says that the building has a choice, or well, really, it's the lower of two numbers. One would be the area median income, or the lesser of that area median income, or consumer price index, which is much more closely aligned with the Social Security COLA. The idea is that let's use a benchmark that's aligned with the people who are actually living in these buildings. This proposal over in the other body has a GOP author that is championing it, so I'm hoping that it can get the bipartisan support that is necessary to move it forward here in the House as well. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I would request a roll call on this amendment.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. There's an amendment to the amendment at the desk. The Chief Clerk will report the amendment to the amendment.
IGO moves to amend the Norris Amendment to House File Number 1141, the second engrossment. The amendment to the amendment is coded A11.
I recognize the member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the amendment today to talk about affordability. Definitely something we talked a lot about in the Housing Committee, and the importance of returning affordability to housing in the state of Minnesota. However, and I'm going to state this quite a bit when I'm talking about why we have this amendment in front of us, rent control in any shape and form is not the solution to affordability in housing in the state of Minnesota, nor in the country, nor in the history of the world. So in the A11 amendment, we rework the language in the A6 amendment to adopt that any city, county, or township may not adopt or renew any ordinance to limit rental increases. So what this would be, members, is a preemption on rent control for the state of Minnesota. We need no better example to see what rent control does to community than being in the city that we are in right now. The city of St. Paul is dealing with tremendous challenges with rent control being in place. And it's a serious problem as we develop to try and bring more affordable housing and more diverse options in housing for every single Minnesotan. This amendment is not meant to be a gotcha amendment. This amendment is meant to be a constructive working argument so that we can keep doing the good bipartisan work of expanding housing options. And the way we get there is by unlocking the free market and allowing the construction of more homes. Because if we remove barriers, we remove burdens that exist in housing, which is out-of-touch mandates that come from local control, like cities, townships, state government as a whole, and that's what the A6 amendment does, which would be statewide rent control. What it does is it handcuffs that private investment that we need to partner with local governments, to partner with communities, and to partner with people to build more homes. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to request a roll call on this.
Seeing 15 hands, there will be a roll call. Representative Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the other ways we can tackle affordability in housing, and it's a conversation that we had in the Housing Committee a lot, is that and what's so unique about housing is that everything about our lives starts at home. But the costs also start at home. Minnesota has some of the highest electric rates in the country, and it's continuing to climb. Energy is expensive here. We have some of the highest taxes in the nation. We're the third highest tax state in the nation. All of these things combine together for a higher cost of living. The solution for fixing housing affordability then isn't capping what you can pay for that rent. The way to fix that is by tax relief, is by rate relief, is by just, frankly, government relief from the overspend and the overburden that's put on every single Minnesotan right now. I appreciate the A6 amendment because Representative Norris has talked about this, and this is a conversation that me and my co-chair are having. It is a concern, but the solution is not an amendment on the House floor to enact statewide rent control. The solution is looking at the bigger problem, which is that taxes are running high and costs are running through the roof, partially because some of the decisions that were made here at the Capitol. But that's the best part about the Capitol is that we as a legislative body can come together to solve these problems with solutions rather than knee-jerk policy. So members, I would encourage a yes vote on the A11 to put Minnesota back on track to remove any chance that there will ever be rent control in place on our communities again so that we can unlock the free market. We can unlock the ability for communities to partner and build out the homes that Minnesotans want, and that's how we will return affordability to Minnesota and housing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will encourage a no vote. Members, this provision didn't get a full vetting in our Housing Committee this year, and it's a pretty significant provision. So on those process grounds, I think it's a worthy conversation to have, but this isn't the right place to have it. I'd encourage a no vote.
I recognize the member from Carver, Representative Nash.
Thanks, Mr. Speaker, and I recommend a yes vote on the IGO amendment. And here's why. Rent control has never worked anywhere. The stifling of the free market does just that. It shuts the free market down. And if you look at places most prominently like New York City, if you look at the buildings that have been subject to rent control for decades, they are in very poor quality. Why? Because you can't collect enough in rents in order to put back into the building in deferred maintenance to not have it fall down around you. And I know this because I have a very good friend that had a mother that they eventually took out of New York City because what happened was in a rent control area, because you couldn't afford to really make any improvements there, it began to degrade and the crime rates went up and his mother was eventually mugged. It promotes a lack of future development as well, because if you are going to enter into a marketplace but you're only told you can collect so many dollars in rent and the cost to build the building supersedes that, why would you even bother? Why would you enter that market? It's completely illogical to market forces. That ultimately will decrease the housing supply. So if you're not building, You're not housing the people. And Chair Howard, I've been there right alongside of you for years talking about the need to build more houses. Why would we not want to make it so you can't have rent control across the state, knowing that it depresses the free market forces? But I think a lot of it comes back to just what happens when a huge swath of the buildings that are out there that are under rent control, like I said, if you go to New York, and I'm sure you've all been there, but a lot of the places that are in the rent control areas are really bad. If you are somebody who's going to put your personal wealth at risk to buy a building, perhaps renovate it, make it nice again, knowing then, though, that you look at the rules of the road according to the city or the county or the township or whatever, that you're not only going to be able, you're not going to be able to make enough out of the rent to pay off what you had to do for a construction loan or to pay off the money that you put into it, why would you bother doing it? So Chair Igo is exactly right. We should not allow statewide rent control to go into effect. And even here in this city, as he alluded to, the rent control that was put out there a couple of years ago is already being chipped away at. A very notable example also, I think, was Sweden. Sweden had rent control, and it went disastrously bad. It's a nice short-term idea to say we're going to make it so that somebody who's there right now doesn't necessarily have to think about long-term implications, but it's more than that. It's longer than that. It's a much longer cycle than that. If you look at the buildings in different areas that have been built since before some of us were even born, if they are that distressed, the more logical place is going to be they're going to be vacant, they might be knocked down, they might be condemned. Why would we do that? That just is completely illogical. Vote yes on the Igo amendment.
Further discussion on the amendment to the amendment. I recognize the author of the amendment to the amendment, the representative from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And members, thank you for the discussion. Again, this is an amendment that would be really strong for us to bring to conference, to have a really good conversation on. We can continue to vet it there, but the solution that we're trying to accomplish is by not controlling markets so we can unlock the capital. I really wanted to dovetail what Representative Nash was saying, is that when we talk about building these larger scale multifamily buildings, those are equity investments for many people. And if they can't make those investments in our community because of fear of not being profitable, then we lose that opportunity. And if we lose that opportunity, that's when Minnesotans suffer. So I hope that this whole chamber will see this amendment for what it is, and it's trying to take a bite out of that affordability problem that we have in Minnesota and try and get the state moving forward to a larger share of housing production. Vote green, members.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll on the amendment to the amendment. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, aye.
Bliss votes aye. Hussein.
Hussein, aye.
Hussein, no.
Hussein votes aye.
Hussein, no.
Hassan changes from aye to no. Momani Hiltsley.
Momani Hiltsley, no.
Momani Hiltsley, no. Perez Vega.
Perez Vega, no.
Perez Vega votes no.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment to the amendment is not adopted. To the underlying amendment, I recognize the member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I just gave my speech about why rent control can't be enacted, and that's what the A6 amendment does. So I would encourage members of this body to vote no. Again, reiterate, my co-chair and I have had this discussion. This is an active thing we're working on, but rent control is not the answer, nor will it ever be. Vote no, members.
Any further discussion to the amendment? I recognize the member from Anoka, Representative Norris.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I just want to clarify a couple of items from the debate. First, we heard a lot about the free market. I think it's really important to emphasize that this is already not a free market. If we are having to subsidize 1/3 of the development of these buildings, this is not a free market system. These are buildings that would not get built under a purely free market. Instead, what we have said is we have a public interest in making sure there are high-quality homes for our seniors with really low incomes. So we are willing to put forward public dollars to have people build these facilities, and in exchange, we are going to have some expectations for them. One of those expectations is that they keep the rent at a reasonable level so that these buildings serve their intended purpose, which is to house low-income seniors. People also said we don't want rent control. Well, the ship has already sailed on that with these facilities because of the agreement that I just articulated. Public funds in exchange for keeping the rents at a reasonable level. If we're going to put public funds toward privately owned facilities, it is reasonable to expect assurances like this in return. This amendment is simply clarifying or adjusting what metric are we going to use to keep those rents at a reasonable rate and achieve the public purpose of putting these public funds toward these buildings. So members, I hope you will join me in adopting this amendment so we can make sure that some of our most vulnerable elders here in Minnesota and all across our state have a place to call home, including right in my district at the Legends of Blaine. This is a bipartisan effort in the other body, and I hope it can be here as well. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. The clerk will call the names of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, no.
Bliss votes no. Hussein.
Aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momani Hilsley.
Momanya Hiltzley, aye.
Momani Hilsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
No.
No, yes.
Perez Vega votes no.
Come again.
Yes.
Perez Vega changes from no to aye.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 67 yeas and 67 nays, the motion does not prevail. The amendment is not adopted. There are no further amendments at the desk. The chief clerk will give the bill its third reading.
Third reading, House File Number 1141.
Third reading. Discussion. I recognize the member from Itasca, Representative Igo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, I'm just going to kind of speak to the bill we were able to put together, just kind of go over the bill here too. My co-chair did a great job explaining some of the things that are in the bill, but really want to talk about how this bill accomplishes the pillars that we had in our housing committee this year, which again are diversity in housing, affordability in housing, creating stability in the state of Minnesota. And if you look at the provisions that are in this bill, we're focusing on building out more workforce housing in greater Minnesota. And we're accomplishing that by utilizing interest earnings that were made off taxpayer dollars and reinvesting them into the programs that the legislature was appropriating to. That is an incredible move of making sure that taxpayer dollars go that extra length and they're not abused. I also want to talk about FHPAP. This was a great use of the Tyler settlement because FHPAP, like was said before, is in every single one of our counties in the state of Minnesota. And I think it goes to show, I really want to educate what FHPAP is. It's that program that doesn't matter where you are in the state, but let's say you are a single parent out there and you lost your job and you are wondering how you're going to make that mortgage payment next month. FHPAP is there for you as a safety net. And as a developed first world country and a state, those are the kind of programs I want to have in Minnesota so that we can be there when families desperately need it. And this is a good program for us to invest into. The HIBS investment is also fantastic. It is, like was said before, the bread and butter of how we can continue to build out more units of housing in the state of Minnesota. And in fact, if you add in the $20 million for workforce housing and the $100 million in HIBS, working with nonpartisan, I was able to do an estimate on how many units of housing this is going to build in the state. And they're estimating anywhere between 2,000 to 2,200 units of housing in the state of Minnesota by this budget-neutral bill today. And I know members have heard me and my co-chair and members of the Housing Committee talk about how we are in a housing shortage. This bill takes a bite out of that and gets us on track, building housing all across the state of Minnesota and diverse types of housing. Everything from single-family homes to workforce housing to multifamily homes, it's going to cover them all. One of the other things I'm really proud of that's in this bill is 6 different transparency and accountability measures. When my co-chair and I discovered all the interest that was being gained in the Minnesota Housing Agency, we went to work and said, well, how can we make sure we get reported about these dollars more? And you'll see inside the bill, there's a lot of reporting mechanisms that come back to the chairs of the committee and the ranking members of the committee so that we know about the transfers. It's also going to prioritize those dollars so that if any interest gains are made, it goes to the admin fees of the agency before we start taking that money away from the taxpayer appropriation. There's also 2 small provisions tucked into this bill that I want to talk about. One of them is the home education, which is the HECAP provision carried by Vice Chair Kozlowski, which is a really wonderful program that helps people learn about how to buy a home, how to pay your mortgage, how to stay out of foreclosure. It's really helping those first-generation homebuyers across the state get the tools they need to be able to purchase homes. And I also want to mention Representative Zalesnikar's senior pilot project about senior home sharing. We're seeing it work in other states, and this pilot's going to see whether it can work here in the state of Minnesota. And it could just unlock more opportunity in housing, especially for our seniors. So in close, again, this is a really good bill. It focuses on that bipartisan nature. I want to thank my co-chair for the great year we had working and tackling issues again. This is a bill that represents compromise and taking the issues of Minnesotans and trying to tackle them front on, but also being incredibly creative. I can't emphasize enough about how this bill is budget neutral. Even the tails appropriation to pay for our HIBS financing is being paid for without taking anything from the general fund, which sets a new precedent in how we can work together as a body to be fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. A huge thanks to all of our staff. I'll thank the Republican side staff, our CA, Betsy Ritzer, our CLA, Lori Cousineau, our researcher, Luke LeBrun, and all of our nonpartisan and other partisan staff. Thank you so much for helping us pull this bill together. I know there's some late nights, lots of research, and a lot of discussion. But members, I would encourage a yes vote on this bill because it's a very, very good bill. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Kozlowski.
Thank you, Speaker. And I'm rising just to continue to add the echo of support for this House File 1141. As we've been talking here, housing is the foundation of everything. And I'm really proud of this bill that puts practical, proven solutions at the forefront, really with urgency, but also that long-term responsibility. Across the state, working families, seniors, And employers alike, from childcare to healthcare to manufacturers, are really feeling the squeeze. I know in Duluth and the community that I represent, we need over 8,000 new homes just to keep pace over the next decade, and talked with many employers who trying to grow their business and scale up, and they just can't because there's not enough homes or homes that employees could live and move into. I also want to give a kudos to our co-chairs, Igo and Chair Howard. This bill really reflects what Minnesotans already know, and I'll add a note if you watch Almanac that they lauded that housing is the model for a co-chairship in this bipartisan legislature, and I think it's because we really came across those lines as Chair Howard talked about, that housing isn't a blue or red issue. This is just a Minnesota issue, and it's a top 3 one for Minnesotans. So it's just a couple notes I'm just going to add to the echo of support for this bill that invests in HIBs and workforce housing that's going to supercharge the production of supply, but also preserve some of our most deeply affordable housing. And one thing I'm really excited about, along with Co-Chair Igo, is the creation and the sustaining of really good paying, hopefully union jobs that are going to put these homes on the market. Again, HECAT, this bill strengthens home ownership. I was proud to lead on that front with the first generation home buyers, getting them mortgage ready, getting them purchase ready, build that generational wealth, and a statewide infrastructure that will be here even into the longevity of home ownership. As you know, it's not always a walk in the park to be a homeowner, and they do have a 95% prevention of foreclosure rate. So they're there when, should somebody need that. And then the last thing, I just got to give a lot of kudos to Rep. Zalesnikar. Minnesotans ask, can we land the plane at the legislature? And I think that this is an example of not only can we land it, but we can do some new innovative things. And in St. Louis County, Lake, and Washington, where we especially have the silver tsunami with the converging increase in seniors and just people in general saying that they're lonely and they're feeling that they're looking for more of that social infrastructure. Looking forward to this bill getting out there and making a big impact. And finally, the FHPAP, I was really proud to champion that. I just want to give a special thank you to the counties, to the FHPAP providers, housing advocates, as well as our many representatives, including Representative Momani Hilty, who has championed this meat and potatoes funding in the past with bipartisan support, as well as my co-pilot and Representative Esther Agbadje. Minnesota nice isn't so nice when you can't afford a home. And just finally, to the thoughtful leadership of our committee for really taking the bull by the head on embedding that oversight and the mechanisms to increase transparency and put that interest to work for the interests of Minnesotans. So I'm looking forward to the work at hand, and just deep gratitude to the staff and everybody's hands who went on this. So with that, vote green, and let's get homes that Minnesotans want and can afford.
I recognize the member from St. Louis, Representative Scraba.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I won't call out making fun of silver tsunami. I'm not there yet, but I'm on my way. Yes. I want to rise in support of the bill. I think I was on housing this year. It's my first time, and it was first term. It's very. I agree with Representative Howard. It shouldn't be a blue or a red. It should be what's best for Minnesotans. And I think this bill tackles a lot of good things. The HIB bonds, those are something we talked about in committee. We looked at it. Sometimes they were too big. I think this is a good one. The $20 million in workforce housing is huge. Greater Minnesota desperately needs workforce housing. We're looking at different ways of working with companies and agencies to get housing on the ground. This $20 million has the potential of putting 1,200 units into work in the next 2 years. So if we could get this thing across the finish line, I think there's a lot of good things in this bill, and I do support it, and I hope everyone else does. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Morrison, Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is a very significant amount of funding into housing, and I wanted to ask if the author of the bill would yield.
He will yield. Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Howard, $100 million to housing infrastructure bonds. When that money has fully been not just appropriated, but when the work has been done, when housing has been built, can you tell the members of this body where that housing will be built? $100 million is very specific. And so I'm really curious, looking towards the future, where will we be able to point to and say, this is where the money was invested?
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Representative Schultz. I mean, the answer is everywhere, border to border, all across our state. That's been the track record of housing infrastructure bonds investments since we started utilizing this tool a little more than 10 years ago. We've built more than 10,000 units of housing, and both to units to own, home ownership. A lot of times we're talking about Habitat for Humanity homes to own. They often get funding all across the state as one of the recipients of HIBs. We also see workforce housing and multifamily housing all across the state. The manufactured housing is another really important topic. Manufactured housing is our state's largest source of affordable home ownership. Housing infrastructure bonds will be used to finance manufactured housing projects and repairs as well. If you're looking for the sort of where specifically, the way this works is there is a RFP process, and developers or nonprofits, communities can submit RFPs. At this level of investment, what you can anticipate is roughly 3 out of the 4 applications will get denied because the need is that great. And projects are scored on a variety of factors, but one of them is their ability to put shovels in the ground. And so we see HIB funding often be prioritized to those projects that are ready to go. From a regional perspective, the historical trend line is about 55% of the resources in HIBs have been included in the 7-county metro area, and 45% have been in greater Minnesota. So a pretty good regional mix. And so, what we've seen from these HIBs in the past is a strong track record of addressing our housing needs all across the state.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Howard. I don't see additional guidance in the bill as to where, that housing should take place. So I appreciated hearing from you, generally where the trend lines are. I think that's helpful for the members. And I wanted to just ask, as someone who doesn't sit on the Housing Committee, as to where you have heard the needs be the greatest in the entire state. And because if I'm almost assuming, granted the other stipulations that you added to your comments with regards to how shovel-ready a project is, between shovel readiness and need, I'm assuming that those are going to be 2 of the top circumstances where these dollars would go. My just general question is, where do you think that this $100 million would go to based upon those characteristics?
You're not asking him to yield?
Would Representative Howard yield to that question?
He will yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Representative Schultz. It's a really good question. I mean, the short answer is the needs are immense everywhere. I mean, we have 100,000 unit housing shortage, and while the needs are everywhere, the needs are a little different. And that's what makes HIB such a great tool, because it's flexible to address those needs by a regional basis. So, we often see the track record of projects in greater Minnesota coming in for workforce housing projects to address the needs of, multifamily housing that but for public investment wouldn't come through. And that's kind of the thing that the drumbeat we hear in greater Minnesota more than anything. It's just that there's a need for housing, but we can't get developers to build because the deals aren't penciling out. And so with public investment, I think we can close those gaps. And so I think in greater Minnesota, you'd probably see multifamily rental housing. In the suburban areas of the state, I think you'll see again, multifamily with a focus on affordable and deeply affordable. And what I mean by deeply affordable is multifamily at 30% AMI or below. That's one of our greatest needs for housing for lower income Minnesotans, that but for public investment, those developments are tough to move forward. So you might see some of those types of investments in more suburban and metro areas. And from a home ownership standpoint, I think you'd see the need for affordable home ownership all across the state. That's pronounced everywhere. And so traditionally you do see home ownership projects getting funded, whether you're in the metro area or greater Minnesota as well.
Representative Schultz.
Mr. Speaker, Representative Howard, my question might then be, like, are there certain places in the state that are really not well prepared to be shovel ready? I guess what I'm hearing from you is broadly this should be able to be implemented in many places, but my great curiosity is, you know, spending this amount of money, just curious as to where might not this investment take place. You specifically referenced moments ago that in many rural Minnesota communities, that oftentimes they struggle because the project's not shovel ready. And so I guess just generally wanting this to be you know, in line with the values that Minnesotans have, and I also want to know, like, from the outset where there might be gaps. So that would be my next question if Representative Howard would yield to that question.
He will continue to yield. Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and Representative Schultz. I guess how I would answer that is based on past track record, the kinds of projects that are getting funded are by and large and are shovel ready because the needs are great and often the big gap is public investment. And so these housing infrastructure bonds are very often, almost always, I think, the last piece to make sure that a project is ready to go. And so, you know, development doesn't happen by the, you know, snap of a finger, but based on past expectation, these resources are being funded, the projects that are being funded are moving forward. Very rarely are, in fact, I'm not aware of examples where projects have been funded and then years later, you know, things haven't gotten moving. I mean, sometimes that comes up in the context of geo-bonding bills. But with these housing infrastructure bonds, by and large, because of how competitive they are, because we're seeing a huge influx of applications that are outsized compared to the dollars, even at that $100 million level, you can expect, based on past track record, that shovels are going on the ground. These projects are moving.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Representative Howard. I believe the last housing bill that we had, so last year, if I remember correctly, it was about $50 million that went to HIBs, if I remember correctly. And so I guess one question I would have for you is, given the amount of resources that the agency currently has, if this bill, you know, whatever happens with this bill, without this bill, I just asked that question. Without this bill, does the agency have the authority currently to use their resources for HIBs?
Just one question you would have for him?
Yes,
Representative
Mr.
Howard,
Speaker.
if he would yield. Just one question for you, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The $50 million allocation for HIBs has went through their RFP process, so they do not have additional housing infrastructure bonds authority. One reason why historically we've tried to do on a bipartisan basis housing infrastructure bonds is in part to keep that pipeline going. Because last year with that $50 million through their RFP process, they're still saying no far more than they're saying yes. So there's projects that are worthy that are sort of waiting in line, if you will, that are worthy, that are ready to go. And so this going in a session, you know, allotting 50 and authorizing 100 this year, it really is wise. And if we were to say not make this, we're just creating a larger backlog, and our housing shortage is going to grow even larger. So I hope that answers your question.
Representative Schultz.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, especially for indulging me here. My long-term question, a lot of times here at the Capitol, we're asked, you know, how many asks are there out there in the state for specifically for bonding, for things like local projects, for wastewater, for roads and bridges, et cetera, and oftentimes that's billions of dollars. And I think for members today, it's also one of the questions as we finish debate on this bill that I have is what is that amount of money? for the future of the state? What is the amount of money, if the resources existed, that we would put into housing to actually truly solve the problem? You know, when it relates to bonding, sometimes people say there's $7 billion worth of bonding that needs to be done, or $9 billion. And for me, my open question for the body is, if we were to look right now to the housing needs in Minnesota, what would that amount of money be? Because it's really helpful for our debate to understand where we're trying to get to. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Washington, Representative Johnson W.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This one's a tough one on me, and one of the reasons is I was thinking is, and I wanted to address, I know when Representative Schultz and Representative Howard were talking about HIBs could be used for manufactured housing. That's true, but the problem is the agency won't give the money out to manufactured housing, and that's something we addressed, and that's something we brought up to try to require him to do it, and it wasn't the right format to do that. And so I think it's, you know, manufactured housing is one of the last methods of affordable housing, and we wish we could do more and done more. I just want to make sure it's known that, yes, HIBs is there, but it's only there if the agency actually allows them or allocates it to them. I know Representative Norris and I had a bill to try to put some funds there for infrastructure for manufactured homes, because these have been around since the 60s and 70s. And as we talk about private equity buying these homes or buying these properties and making them unaffordable for various reasons, one of the reasons that the mom and pops, who still make up a majority of them, have to sell out and do sell out is because from 60s and 70s they have infrastructure they have to put into place. A lot of times they can't do that. And so we need to, one of the sources and one of the ways we can do that to address the purchasing of private equity from these mom and pops is to make sure these mom and pops of these parks have resources and availability to invest in these, you know, and there's a program there that if they do use those funds, they can't sell out right away. So it actually locks them in. So I just wanted, the main thing is, I think in the housing, we need to do more for the manufactured housing market. I wanted to clarify, it's great for the money's there, but the money has to really be there for them to use. I thank you to the two chairs for all the efforts they made this year. I look forward to going forward as we start addressing some more of these for the manufacturing home market, and we start working with the people that are in the true affordable, last form of affordable housing. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I recognize a member from St. Louis, Representative Zalesnikar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just wanted to rise and say thank you. I'm not on the Housing Committee, but thank you to my colleagues. And, you know, in 23, when I started the first session, I went on to a conference that was bipartisan with Senate, House legislators, and that's where the home share idea came from. So that's the wonderful thing when we get a chance to go to bipartisan conferences. It's my bill, but it wasn't my idea. But I'm really glad to see we're going to pilot it in Minnesota because it's helping other seniors across the country. And when we look at workforce housing, like the greater Minnesota workforce housing, there's $20 million. That's going to help with a lot of houses. But it takes time to build houses. So when you're looking at this, the rents for the program on this pilot study across the country are like $800 a month to $1,000 a month. So for students or for, you know, people at various chapters of their life, they can find affordable housing, and it's a win for the seniors who, when you look at their profiles, they're like, they write what they enjoy. They love to garden. They like to walk. They're looking for somebody that, you know, matches. They get to pick, and it has a vetting system. And so this is going to give opportunities for us. Is it going to solve all the workforce housing issues? No. But it is also going to give people a chance. Greater Minnesota and the suburbs and the metro, the one thing that that is interesting about this is I've had calls from people in all these areas saying, get this pilot project done and get this statewide so that we have more options. And it also allows them to increase their income on Social Security. So thank you very much. I think it's a great bill, and vote green.
Any further discussion? I recognize the author of the bill, the member from Hennepin, Representative Howard.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Really appreciate the discussion on this bill. I already did thank yous, but I just want to reiterate my thanks, especially to my Vice Chair Kozlowski for their partnership on 2 years of really strong work, and to my co-chair, Spencer Igo. I really think this has been the model of how we can work in a tied legislature to put the focus on the challenges we're trying to address and come to solutions. This is, as Representative Igo mentioned, a creative way to address some really immense needs. We know the needs are immense. To Representative Schultz's point, there are huge public investment needs. Public investment alone won't solve our housing crisis. It's why we need to continue working on reform items. But this bill, in its entirety, is a strong step. So if you want to build more homes, both to rent and to own, vote yes. If you want to increase transparency and accountability in state government, vote yes. If you believe Minnesota families, no matter where they live, deserve a safe, affordable place to call home, vote yes. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, the clerk will take the roll. Members, please vote. The clerk will call the name of the members voting remotely.
Bliss.
Bliss, aye.
Bliss votes aye. Hussein.
Go ahead.
Aye.
Hussein votes aye. Momonty Hiltsley.
Momanya Hiltsley proudly votes aye.
Momonty Hiltsley votes aye. Perez Vega.
The clerk will close the roll. There being 99 yeas and 34 nays, the bill is passed and its title agreed to.